Here we go again.
No, not again.
You've been before.
How long have we been doing this?
Once more unto the bridge. Until we're both dead.
Hello and welcome to You've Seen It Before, and movie reviews of Connections of Mind. Dunkirk is just hitting theaters as the latest film directed by Christopher Nolan and is the true story of the British evacuation of its troops off of the beach of Dunkirk while the German army has surrounded this beach and their planes are bombing the men on the beaches, and the British Navy must enlist the help of the private citizens' boats in order to get these men off of the beaches in order to save their army and have an army with which to defend Britain against the Germans. And is definitely a tale of survival. Now, this video review will contain spoilers of Dunkirk, as well as a couple other films. There will be a full list in the description below. And if you have not seen Dunkirk yet, or any of the films listed below, and want to wait until you have, stop the video at this point and come back later. But with these things in mind, though, let's begin. So Dunkirk, it really isn't. There really isn't a lot to say about the plot per se. It really is just a tale of survival. And if you're interested in learning about the true historical facts of the event leading up to and during the evacuation of Dunkirk, I will point you towards my review of Dunkirk, It Really Happened, where I basically lay out the historical context of this film. But just to sum it up, this is the story of, it's told in three different perspectives, one of which is the men on the beaches waiting for evacuation back to Britain. The second point of view is the point of view of one of the ship captains, who is played by Mark Rylance, and his small pleasure yacht has been requisitioned by the Royal Navy in order to help evacuate these men off the beaches, and he starts sailing towards Dunkirk and picks up Cillian Murphy's character, who is a British soldier, is one of the survivors of a destroyer that got torpedoed. And the third point of view is of a pair of RAF fighter pilots, one of which was played by Tom Hardy, and their job is to keep the German planes from bombing the ships, evacuating the men off the beach, as well as the men who are waiting their turns on the beaches, essentially helpless against these German bombers trying to kill them. Now, there's a couple of things that are striking about this film that are similar to what you've seen before. So let's start with the obvious ones and go from there. Now, there are only a couple things with this film that you've actually seen before, but one of the things that is very unique from a directorial standpoint is the fact that this film actually kind of plays with time, with the way it portrays the events of of each of its characters. By that I mean it tends to go forward and backward in time, switching between perspectives. In which at one point you'll be watching the perspective of one of the men on the beach trying to get off, and then it'll cut to, for instance, Tom Hardy's character in the Spitfire flying around, and you'll find that it actually is a few minutes or a couple, 20 minutes, half an hour, or whatever earlier than what you've already seen happen. So it's showing you the same events over and over again, but it cuts it right at the time when you know something big is going to happen, and that way it kind of lends to a bit of suspense in the way that it's portraying the story. It's not telling the story linearly. It actually is going back and forth a lot. Now, this is very reminiscent of Christopher Nolan's earlier film, Memento, in which he also told the story non-linearly. Or actually, that's not necessarily the case. He played it half linearly, where there are two halves of this movie, essentially, half of which is Guy Ritchie's character talking on the phone. That is played in chronological order, but cut in between there is the main footage played in reverse order, and he cuts back and forth between these. So there's an instance of Christopher Nolan directing a film where the events are not being portrayed in a straight ABC fashion. Next, and this is one of those things where you kind of have to be careful when comparing this film to other films, because again, this is a film based on real life events, and it's kind of hard to compare that to other films, mostly because Dunkirk has not been shown on film much. But I can say one film that that does what Dunkirk does, which is to depict the film and try to give you the emotional context of the men who were in that situation, try to replicate that feeling in the audience, and it does do this well. With the sounds and especially the silence itself, you feel the dread of these men, and especially when the German dive bombers, who were rigged with sirens for this very purpose to scare the men as they were about to be bombed, they crank up the volume during that time in order to rattle you, and it gives the film very visceral feeling, and it really unnerves you, and it's supposed to unnerve you. Now, this is very similar to what another war film did previously with another World War II event, mainly Saving Private Ryan. And I point specifically to the opening, about 20 minutes opening sequence of the landings at Omaha Beach. And that was a more visual sense, as well as both between the level of gore that was shown, that was very highly realistic, which no other the film depicting the D-Day landings had ever done before, and the way Steven Spielberg shot the landings with a handheld camera approach in order to instill in the audience a sense of anxiety and tension, to make people who are watching Saving Private Ryan feel that they don't know what's going on. They're very in the moment. That was something that that film did very well, and Dunkirk has done as well. So that's a style point that this film copies as well. There you have it. Those are the main couple of points. You'll notice that I tend not to do such short segments with comparison. There's usually a couple other things to compare a movie to, but like I said, there's when you have a film showing true life events, it's kind of hard to say, oh, well, that event happened, that's been done before. Yes, obviously there are other war films out there that you can compare this to, but the point is that whether or not you should go see this film, that's the main crux of this video. And I would say absolutely, mainly from a couple of different perspectives. One, as a film itself, it is gorgeous. It is visually stunning. The sound design is incredible, and the sound design is very important because there's actually very little dialogue in this film. It really depends on you telling the story by how the characters are looking at each other, what's not spoken, as well as the music and the sounds that are amplified, such as whenever a gun is shot, it is very jarring, and there's not a whole lot of shooting going on for the most part, as well as like the sirens of the German dive bombers, the lighting as well. It does play a role in showing the motivations of a lot of the characters. There is one character in particular who doesn't say a word throughout like 2/3 of the movie, and the way his reaction is and how his face is lit throughout a couple of scenes tells volumes of his character development and what his direction will go. And it is kind of surprising how his character is developed. also, Tom Hardy's character, who doesn't say a whole lot, and even when he does, his face is covered by a mask. But the way you can tell a lot from what he's feeling by his eyes, and that's very important. So, by and large, I would say this is the way cinema is supposed to be done. This is something that a lot of other films should aspire to. It's very telling that you can instill such emotions and tell so much without actually saying a whole lot. So there's a great reason to go see this film. And the second point I should say you should go see this film is, like I said in my my historical context video, from a historical perspective, especially Americans should go see this film, because people across the pond in England, they've grown up with the story in their passed down from their parents and their grandparents, and in schools as well. And they've grown up with this. They know the story at least, and it's part of their culture. But in America, there's not a whole lot to in American schools to teach kids as they grow up what exactly this event is. And if you don't, it's important to know the context of this as well. And though they don't explicitly say it in the film, it's important to understand what these men went through and the importance of them getting those 338,000 men off the beach. Because if they hadn't, then the German army would not have faced all that much opposition if they when they were planning to invade Great Britain. So there's a great reason to see this, at least from a historical standpoint. Now, are there a couple things that I would have done differently? Of course. The one thing, as I said before, this film does not tell the story in a straight ABC fashion. It jumps back and forth in time and between different viewpoints. Different viewpoints is great. I love the fact that it does different viewpoints, but the way that it cuts the time, I don't necessarily think it's necessary. Because it took me about a third of the way through the film before I actually realized what was going on, and there really wasn't any reason to keep that a surprise. And for me, it didn't really feel necessary. I feel like if you just told it in straight fashion, it probably would have done. It would have done fairly. It would have been as effective as it was, and it didn't really need it. It added a layer of unnecessary confusion. And another thing for people who actually do care about dialogue, what little there is, it really is kind of devoid of emotion. There's if you watch the trailer and see and hear what lines are said, that's about all the emotion there is, actually. What lines of dialogue that were not in the trailers, there's not a whole lot. It is all kind of one note. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, but that's what it is, and I feel like it probably could have been done a little better, but that's just me. For the most part, these are actually minor nitpicks, and I would say, for what it is a stunning film. Definitely go see it in IMAX, because I went to the local theater right next to me doesn't actually have IMAX, and I would say an IMAX size screen would only improve the quality of this film. So, not to say that if you don't go to the IMAX, it won't enjoy it, but I'm saying if you do go to the IMAX, you'll get the great experience, but even more. So there you have it. There's my review of Dunkirk. I recommend you see it, and like I said, go check out my video talking about the historical context of Dunkirk. Be sure to check out my written review in the link down below. And also check out next weekend when I review Atomic Blonde, which comes out July 28th. And I thank you for watching. I just appreciate whatever audience I can get. And just remember, there's nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before. So until next time.